So what's the burning problem? One of the key observations we saw is that data teams or budgets are not growing. And that's primarily because teams are typically being run fairly lean, but the data work is still increasing. As a result, most organizations are having to do data work with less. Now, what do you do when you have to do things with less? One is you might as well not do much of the work that needs to be done. Number two is your team is really overloaded. And both are really untenable situations, which is why that was one of the key observations we made. The second is that analytics engineering, if you really take a 50,000 feet or a 60,000 feet view, has a steep learning curve. We all love DBT, we love various different technologies within the SQL framework space, but they all have a steep learning curve. Beyond the 5, 10 experts within the organization, it doesn't scale beyond that in a meaningful and relevant way. And the third piece, I think I have personally felt a lot of times, and I'm sure others have as well, is that 80% of the work is rote work. It's just a lot of low value work. If you have to set up a model, let's say you have a NetSuite model being extracted by Fivetran in your Snowflake warehouse, you have a table with like 100 columns and you have to rename those 100 columns manually. And it is just meaningless rote work, and nobody's going to document those models, nobody's going to write tests for those models. As a result, you end up with really good metrics with no real good tests or documentation behind it, because most of the work is literally rote work and low value. As a result, we've been thinking like, okay, how can we make easy work really easy? Second is so that teams can really focus on what is impactful, what can drive business value, what can drive business growth, what can drive revenue for the business. And lastly, expand the remit of how many people can actually do this development work across an organization. So when we thought about it, we looked at what is like the current state of the art, and we see like a couple of patterns emerge from there. One of the patterns we see is people have their code editor, which is like a VS Code. They might have a PyCharm. And what you do is you write code, you copy it to an LLM console like Claude or OpenAI, and then whatever is the code generated, you take it to your data warehouse, SQL Workbench, whether it's Snowsite or something else that you are using. You test what is going on, you bring that thing back into VS Code. You might have a dbt power user extension to sort of circumvent the VS Code to data warehouse part, and so on and so forth. But it's just clunky, it just goes on, and it's dead by 1,000 paper cuts. And more importantly, the code that you are working on the LLM side has no context of your data, has literally zero context of your data. And most of the LLMs that you work with, there is not enough publicly available DBT code that actually can give you really good results. So as a result, to improve your outcomes from an LLM perspective, you have to use as much data context as you can get. So that's one workflow we see people do quite a lot. The other workflow we've seen also people do is use something like a AI first code editor like Cursor or Windsurf, but they are built really well for software engineering. Even we use it internally for some of the stuff that we do as well. But again, when it comes to something like a Cursor, it again doesn't have the data context. You can probably try and bring it through an MCP or something to that effect. But again, you have to wait for that MCP server to be available or build it yourself. Even if you have the MCP server, you do not have any guardrails in place. For example, I have spoken with folks who have set up Cursor and or Windsurf and started doing DBT development work, and all of a sudden, the code is running select start statements on petabyte scale warehouses. So you do not really have those guardrails in place, and it's not tailored for analytics engineering. Means you do not have the lineage, you do not have the catalog, you do not have the concept of what BI dashboards and things like that you are using. So it doesn't really have that context of analytics engineering, doesn't have SQL fluff, doesn't have all of these things that you need as part of your development environment. So it does circumvent the problem of traveling back and forth between LLM and VS Code, but it doesn't solve the problem of data context, which leads us to what we are launching today. which is how can we actually bring cursor for data all together in one single place so that you can just go about building and not have to worry about any of the other things. So what are we launching today? We have taken our rock solid IDE that has been used by hundreds and thousands of users across hundreds of organizations, that is already working really well, and we have added our Dyno AI v2 to it so that you are able to do work in code mode. What that means is that on the back of a prompt and things like that that you add, Dyno AI is now able to generate code for you, generate documentation for you, generate tests for you, and it does that not only just for one model, it can build an entire data pipeline for you, and it has the context of your complete warehouse information schema. It also has sensible guardrails in place so that you are not making unnecessary dbt runs, you are not making unnecessary select star statements on your warehouse. And where we are going with there is that you already have the context of BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, Databricks, MotherDuck, DuckDB, ClickHouse, Trino, any of these warehouses that you already can connect to Paradigm now is available as a context for you to do your data development using Dyno AI, which means it eliminates about 99% of your rote work. And what you are left with is focusing on the business logic, focusing on the insights, focusing on what is actually valuable for the business.